They thought they had cornered us, an elderly grandparent against an entire HOA, but they underestimated the power of cunning, a deep understanding of the law, and a legacy worth fighting for. This isn't just a story about a property dispute. It's a master class in how to outsmart those who seek to dominate, culminating in a victory so decisive the HOA probably still feels the sting. Get ready for a battle you won't believe. It all began with a phone call, the kind that both warms your heart and chills you to the bone. My grandmother had passed away, and in her will she left me her home. Not just any house, but the house. The one where I spent every summer, where the scent of her baking still lingered in my memory, and every scratch on the floorboards told the story of my childhood. The initial feeling was overwhelming joy, mixed with a profound sense of loss. I was now the keeper of our family's history, a legacy encapsulated in 4 walls and a slightly overgrown garden. I spent the first few weeks just being there, walking through the rooms, touching the old furniture, and feeling her presence everywhere. It was a time of peaceful reflection, of connecting with my roots. I started making small plans, thinking about how to preserve its charm while adding my own touch. The future of this house, our house, seemed so bright and full of promise. I couldn't have been more wrong. About a month in, the first letter arrived. It was in a crisp, official-looking envelope with a logo I didn't recognize, the Crestwood Hills Homeowners Association. I opened it casually, expecting a welcome packet or some neighborhood news. Instead, my blood ran cold. It wasn't a welcome. It was a demand. The letter listed a series of violations, the peeling paint on the window trim, a fence that was supposedly half an inch too high, and the state of the garden. It demanded immediate, substantial repairs within 30 days, or I would face hefty daily fines. I was stunned. The house was old, yes, but it was well kept, full of character. These demands felt aggressive, almost personal. I called my dad, flustered, to ask him about this HOA. I'd never heard my grandmother mention it. His sigh on the other end of the line was heavy. "Ah," he said, "so they're starting with you already." That's when he dropped the bombshell. My sweet, quiet grandmother hadn't just been living in her house. She had been fighting a silent war for years. The HOA wasn't just a neighborhood committee. They were a formidable opponent she had been battling over the very soul of her property. I hadn't just inherited a house. I had inherited her fight. The single letter was no longer just a notice. It was a declaration of war, and the first shot had been fired. I started digging through her old files, tucked away in a dusty office. What I found was a stack of papers a foot high, letters, legal threats, and documented complaints going back a decade. She had been meticulously documenting every interaction, every unfair accusation. The sheer volume of it was staggering. This wasn't a simple dispute over paint color. This was a long-term campaign of harassment. They had seen her as an easy target, an old woman they could bully into submission. Now they saw me as the next easy target. Little did they know, my grandmother had left me more than just a house. She had left me a blueprint for the fight, and I was about to follow it to the letter. This was no longer just about preserving a home. It was about defending her honor. The battle was just beginning. This is where our story truly starts. I had to learn the rules of their game, and then figure out how to write my own. If you want to see how a little bit of legal homework and a whole lot of determination can turn the tables on a power-hungry HOA, Make sure you're subscribed and have notifications turned on. You won't want to miss what happens next. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in part 2. Just when I thought things couldn't get any crazier with the HOA, they did. Remember that letter about my perfectly normal mailbox? Well, the HOA decided to double down. Forget friendly reminders. Now they were talking about forced sales and putting a lien on my house. My house, the one my grandparents left me. They wouldn't even discuss it. Their letters became more frequent, more aggressive, each one feeling like a punch to the gut. It felt like they were trying to bully me out of my own home, the place I grew up making memories in. I was starting to lose hope, feeling completely cornered. Desperate, I started going through everything my grandparents had left behind. I spent days, weeks buried in boxes of old photos, letters, and dusty junk. I was looking for anything, a scrap of paper, a forgotten note, some clue that could help me fight back. I knew my grandpa had his own run-ins with them, but I never knew the details. I searched through his old workshop, his closets, even the attic. Nothing. It felt like I was chasing a ghost, and the HOA's deadline was getting closer and closer. The stress was immense. I was barely sleeping, just thinking about losing the house. Then, one rainy afternoon, I was in the study, just sitting in my grandpa's old leather chair, feeling defeated. My hand was resting on his favorite bookshelf, full of old law books he never seemed to read. I idly pulled one out, a thick, unassuming volume on property law. As I opened it, something felt off. The pages were hollowed out. My heart started pounding. Inside, nestled in the cutout space, was a small leather-bound journal and a stack of documents tied with a string. I couldn't believe it. A real-life secret compartment. My hands were shaking as I opened the journal. The first page, in my grandpa's distinctive, neat handwriting, read, H.O., a vengeance plan, to be opened upon their inevitable return. I just stared at it. Vengeance plan? It was like a message from beyond the grave. This wasn't just some old dispute. This was a war he had been planning for decades. The journal was a meticulous log, detailing every single rule the HOA themselves had broken over the last 30 years. He had dates, photos, and signed witness statements from old neighbors. He documented illegal meetings, unapproved construction on board members' own properties, and misspent funds. It was an encyclopedia of their hypocrisy. But that wasn't even the best part. Tucked in with the documents was a faded copy of the original HOA bylaws from the 1970s. With it was a letter from his lawyer. My grandpa had discovered a loophole, a forgotten amendment clause that nobody on the current board knew about. It essentially gave original homeowners and their direct descendants the power to veto any new aesthetic rule they deemed unreasonable. And to top it all off, there was a personal letter addressed to me. He wrote that he knew this day would come. He told me he fought them quietly for years, gathering ammunition, waiting for the right moment. He said he was sorry he couldn't be there to fight with me, but he had left me all the weapons I would need. It wasn't just about a mailbox anymore. This was about legacy. This was about finishing the fight my grandpa started. And now, holding his plan in my hands, I knew exactly what I had to do. The game had just changed. Stay tuned for part 3, because this is where it gets really good. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss the conclusion. It's time for the counterattack. My grandpa's last words weren't a plea for help. They were a battle plan. He'd left a name, not of a big-shot lawyer from a downtown firm, but a name I'd never heard of. A local guy tucked away in a small office above a bakery. The online reviews were sparse but telling. Unconventional. A bulldog. Doesn't lose. My grandpa knew we didn't just need a lawyer. We needed a saboteur. I walked into his office, a room piled high with dusty law books, the air smelling of old paper and fresh croissants from downstairs. I laid out the box of my grandfather's research, the faded documents, the highlighted bylaws, the scribbled notes. He didn't even look at them at first. He just listened. After I finished, he spent a full hour in silence, just poring over every single piece of paper my grandpa had collected over the years. Finally, he leaned back, a slow grin spreading across his face. "Your grandfather," he said, "was a menace." "I love it." He confirmed everything. The plan was not just brilliant. It was devastating. It was also incredibly risky. If we failed, we'd lose the house and probably face a massive lawsuit from the HOA for our troubles. But if we won, we wouldn't just win. We'd dismantle their entire power structure. He asked if I was sure. Looking at the photo of my grandpa on my phone, I'd never been more sure of anything. "Let's do it," I said. The next 2 weeks were a blur of preparation. We weren't just defending against their ridiculous claims. We were preparing an ambush. We were weaponizing my grandpa's decades of quiet observation. My lawyer drafted a motion that was a work of art. It wasn't a defense. It was an accusation. It wasn't a plea. It was a declaration of war. The day came to file our response. The HOA expected a simple, maybe even desperate legal argument to keep the house. They expected us to beg for mercy. What they got was a bombshell. We didn't just challenge their fines. We challenged their very right to govern. We used their own forgotten founding documents, the ones my grandpa had unearthed, to argue that the board itself was operating outside its original charter. We alleged that for years they had been illegally overstepping their authority, levying fines and enforcing rules that they had no legal basis to create. I wish I could have been a fly on the wall in their next board meeting. The first call came from their high-priced lawyer, and the panic in his voice was music to my ears. He was stammering, confused. He'd never seen a response like this. They thought this was a simple foreclosure on a grieving family, an easy win. Suddenly they weren't the predators anymore. They were the prey. The ground they had stood on so arrogantly for decades was crumbling right under their feet. They were scrambling, trying to understand how their slam-dunk case had just turned into a fight for their very existence. My grandpa had set a trap years ago, and the HOA had just walked right into it. They had no idea the battle had just begun, and they were already losing. This wasn't about a satellite dish or the color of a mailbox anymore. This was for my grandfather. This was for every resident they'd ever bullied. The counterattack was in full swing, and we were just getting started. Thanks for following along on this journey. Be sure to subscribe so you don't miss the final epic conclusion. You won't believe what happens next. The day of the final board meeting arrived. The air in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife. The HOA board, led by Corinne, sat on one side, looking smug and confident. They thought this was a done deal, just a formality before they could foreclose on my grandpa's house. I sat on the other side, a stack of papers in front of me, my heart pounding in my chest. I wasn't just fighting for a house. I was fighting for my grandpa's legacy. Corinne started the meeting, her voice dripping with fake sympathy. She laid out their case, listing every fine, every violation, every single complaint they had trumped up against me. It was a mountain of nonsense designed to overwhelm and intimidate. When she finished, she looked at me, a triumphant smirk on her face. "Do you have anything to say?" she asked, as if my words were meaningless. "I do, actually," I said, standing up. I felt a surge of adrenaline. This was it. I opened my grandpa's folder. According to the HOA's own bylaws, specifically Article 7, Section 3, any property built before the official establishment of this homeowners association in 1982 is grandfathered in and exempt from certain aesthetic regulations established after that date, provided the original structure remains. A confused murmur went through the room. Corinne's smile faltered. "What are you talking about? That clause hasn't been relevant for decades." "Hasn't it?" I replied, pulling out the original city permits for the house, dated 1979. My grandfather built this house 3 years before the HOA even existed. He was one of the first residents here. He never signed the initial agreement because his property predated it. He was a founding member, but on his own terms. His property was never legally bound by the bylaws you're trying to enforce. The room erupted. People were shouting, looking at the board, then back at me. Corinne's face went from pale to beet red. She started sputtering, trying to argue, but the evidence was undeniable. It was a masterstroke, a loophole my grandpa had known about all along. He had left me the ultimate weapon. But I wasn't done. "Furthermore," I continued, my voice ringing with authority, "I'd like to present evidence of the board's selective enforcement and negligence." I held up a thick binder. "Here are photos and documented complaints from over a dozen other homeowners about the same issues. Peeling paint, untrimmed hedges, you name it, all ignored. All except for me. You didn't care about the community's standards. You just wanted my house." The fallout was immediate and spectacular. The meeting devolved into chaos. Faced with a potential lawsuit for harassment and a clear violation of their own governing documents, the board had no choice. They didn't just drop the fines. The Regional Oversight Committee, which had been called in to observe, launched a full-scale investigation into the board's practices. Within a week, Corinne and her entire crony committee were forced to resign in disgrace. The story spread through the neighborhood like wildfire. Some were angry, loyal to the old guard, but most were relieved, even grateful. They saw me not as a troublemaker, but as the person who finally stood up to the bullies who had been ruling our community with an iron fist for years. Today I still live in my grandpa's house. The pink flamingos are still on the lawn, brighter than ever. The house isn't just a home anymore. It's a landmark, a symbol of resilience, of a quiet man's cleverness, and of a love that reached beyond the grave to protect his family. My grandpa didn't just leave me a house. He left me a victory. And that right there was the sweetest vengeance of all. Thanks for following this incredible journey with me. If you loved this story, make sure to hit that subscribe button, because you never know what tales are waiting to be told. See you next time.